Section 4 of The Black Cat, Volume 6, Number 5, February 1901. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Shrimpfish. The Black Cat, Volume 6, Number 5, February 1901. Section 4. The Cross on the Plain, by George Dyre Eldridge. A land so desolate that imagination might not picture it, the surface alternating in gray and red, where the disintegrated lime and sandstone lay side by side without mingling, a soil too coarse for vegetation, hard with the baking of a burning sun, and worn into ridges, where the spring torrents of the melting snow of the mountains had eaten away the softer earth. In scattered clumps, gray sage, seeming in its lifeless dryness rather a part of the dead soil than a living growth from it. Here and there gleamed white in the sunshine masses of bleached bones of cattle, perhaps of men, who had wandered there and died. The vast plain that stretched, a dead waste, to the mountains which hung like banks of mist on the edge of the horizon, was broken by hideous masses of red sandstone, gigantic, water-worn into curious shapes by the floods of ages untold. Here, one stood isolated, in the form of a crouching animal ready to spring. There, they lay along the plain, as if huge lizards had been suddenly turned to stone. Again, one towered like a pillar, carved with strange devices of a forgotten people. And yonder, in masses and groups and rows, they seemed the ruins of some vast city, whose streets and squares must have echoed to busy feet hundreds, thousands of years ago. Not a tree in the vast plain, but over all a sky without a cloud, and a sun not yet at the meridian, that burned with more than tropic heat. Suddenly, in the very center of this horror of desolation, appeared a man. He was crouching in the water-worn hollow of one of the biggest rocks, cowering in its blackest shadow and gazing off across the wide plain to the dim mist that told where the mountains lay. There was a haggard, hunted look in his face, and when in the deep stillness, unbroken by the hum of a locust or the buzz of a beetle, a bit of sandstone dropped from the great boulders, he shivered as with fear and drew deeper into the shadow of the hollowed rock. After some minutes, he seemed to gather courage and suddenly dropped from his rock shelter, flat upon the ground, still, however, within the shadows of the great boulder. Then he raised his head and again gazed away towards the mountain. It was as if he felt that the mountain had eyes and was watching the great plain, on which anything that moved would be seen through the clear air and known by its power of life to be strange to that dead world. After a time he was crawling like a lizard, out of the shadows, across a stretch of hot sunlight, in among the scant sage bushes, crawling as if he would be a part of the gray and red earth, if only he could burrow into it and escape sight. Even when he reached the sage bushes he did not rise, but instead crept on and on until he came to one of those hideous water-worn gullies, into which he rolled without raising his body from the ground. There he lay for a time, as if expecting that the dead plain would give some token that his caution had been in vain. Streams of perspiration rolled down his face and mixed with the white dust that was rising constantly from the dead soil, working into the pores of his skin and parching his mouth and throat as he lay and listened to his own heartbeats and the awful silence. Evidently the gully had been selected as leading in the direction he wished to take, for finally he rose to a crouching posture and began to move up its course, walking almost swiftly, though with still bended back where it was deep and the sagebush hung over it, and crawling again where it grew shallow and lay open to the sun. In this way, after an hour of toil, he reached a mass of boulders, around which the gully bent, and here he raised himself in the deep shadows on the side farthest from the mountains he had watched so intently before he began his journey, and darted suddenly over the overhanging ledge where the water had worn away the softer rock, and hid again in a hollow as before. Then followed hours of strange toil. At times the man lay flat on the hot plain and dragged himself along, taking minutes to move his own length, so that anyone watching would have needed a keen and steady eye to be certain that he moved at all. Then, in a friendly gully, he moved faster, with the crouching posture of the morning, and even once, where the great boulders stood like the ruins of an ancient city, he almost ran through the black shadows of what seemed once to have been a street, only throwing himself down to crawl where an open place, like a cross street, let in the unwelcome sunlight. The perspiration had ceased to flow, for every drop of moisture was burned from his body. The grime stood on his face in dry patches, his eyes were red and bloodshot, his tongue hung from his mouth, and even the hot stones had ceased to burn his flesh. So hot had it become in his fierce struggle under that untempered sun. In the early afternoon he stopped to rest in the shaded hollow of a boulder, and suddenly, as he looked to the ground, his face blanched under its coating of grime. A broken sagebush told where a foot had passed. This man had reached a point where signs of humanity were more terrible than the death that surrounded him on every hand. He looked again, and the pallor became more terrible, with the set terror of despair. He recognized the spot where he had rested in the morning, and from which he had crawled to the first gully. It was his foot that had broken the sagebush, and all these hours of superhuman toil had availed only to bring him back to his starting point. Then he rose erect, no longer creeping, no longer skulking, but upright, as God meant man to walk, and took the direction in which lay the mist that was a mountain. Hours passed again. The sun had almost touched the top of the mountains, which now rose huge and dark before the man who dragged on and on over the dead plain, with purple face and swollen hands and feet, filled with but one thought, conscious of but one wish, to reach the shelter of the mountains, and there to find water and drinking, perchance to die. Long shadows ran out to meet him. A cooler air from the mountain heights touched his brow. In a gully, high up among the ragged pines, he caught a sheen of light, where the last sun rays struck a falling stream. Suddenly, from behind a great boulder, a horseman barred the way, the bridle rein hanging loose, a short rifle at his shoulder, aimed at the hunted man's heart. The fugitive stopped. His weary head dropped, and with his swollen hand he made the sign of the cross on brow and breast. Then came the sharp, quick ring of the rifle, and the man fell, with arms outspread, and with a single groan lay dead, himself making the sign of the cross on the dead plain. The horseman adjusted his rifle across his saddle, gave one glance at the dead body to make sure that his aim had been true, and rode away into the depths of the mountains. End of section 4.